have a microphone again. It's a good many years since I was president, and I've got to just tell you some of the things that have changed and some of the things that haven't changed since I was president in 1986-87. When I first started attending Rotary meetings, we met in the Brown Hotel, Crystal Ballroom, and the Brown was very helpful at that time. They set up 2 bars for the Rotary meetings. The meetings were a little more raucous at that time. And also I remember that there were a good many people who smoked, and it was an accepted thing at that time, and now certainly we don't see any smoking now. The meeting started at 12:10 of all times, and that was when lunch was served. You came and sat down at the table, and the meeting was over at 1:30. So that's quite a bit lengthy time from what we are now. Membership was at that time 422. It's now 455, so we've had a good increase there. Average attendance back at that time was 81%. It's now 46%. And I think that's a healthy change because we have a system where it's easier to have make-up meetings. So that was, I think, a worthwhile change. Average age at that time was 59. It's 62 now, and that really surprised me because we've taken in a lot of new members, but I guess some of the old people are just like me, are staying around a little bit longer. We left the Brown Hotel, and since that time we've gone to the Kentucky Hotel, Jim Porter's Tavern, which was an entertaining place to have a Rotary meeting, the Holiday Inn at Zorn Avenue when it was the Holiday Inn, and the YWCA, the old Henry Clay Hotel. One of the things that hasn't changed a lot, we've always had good programs. And I went back over the issues of sparks I had when I was president and ran across one of the speakers who happened to be the FBI agent here in Louisville. And he made a remark about the 2 biggest challenges facing this country right now, or right at that time. One was terrorism, and the other was drugs. Now, this was back in 1986, so nothing much has changed since then. Another program I remember, and I've told this story before, so if you've heard it, forgive me. There were 2 men who were impersonators impersonating George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. And they came dressed in their colonial garb and really gave a very interesting historical program. And George Washington was introduced first, and he talked about what it was like to be the first president of the country and what his challenges were. And he went on a little bit more, and then he finished his remark, and I was sitting right next to an older Rotarian at the time who was senile. That was long before Alzheimer's came along, but he was a little senile. And George Washington said, "Now I want to introduce Thomas Jefferson." And this person I was sitting next to leaned over and said, "I thought he died." One of the other big changes, I guess the biggest change I've seen since I was president, in 1986, Rotary International allowed the membership of women. And at that time, it was very controversial. But in 1987, we took in our first female member, Patsy Hart, and now our female membership is up to 17%, which again, I think is very healthy. Two or three things that haven't changed since I was president. One is our motto is still the same: service above self. Four-way test is still in effect. We still have a lot of good programs that are for local development and also international development. Another thing that hasn't changed, and I really appreciate this, being a member of Rotary gives you a chance to come and meet once a week with successful people and really developing long-term friendships and enjoying learning about other people and really broadening yourself. And I remember I have a good friend here in Rotary. I won't mention his name, but several years ago I was visiting him in his office, and we were talking about, I think, some Rotary project, and he got a phone call, and he took the phone and answered the phone, and I remember hearing his side of the conversation, and when something like this, "Yes, dear. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. Yes, dear." Then he said goodbye and he hung up and he turned to me and said, "I guess I told her."
It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Houston Barber. Dr. Barber is currently the principal at the Academy at Shawnee, a position he assumed at the beginning of January. Prior to becoming the principal at the Academy at Shawnee, he served as the principal of Fern Creek High School for 7 years. During this time and under his leadership, Fern Creek made significant progress in moving out of turnaround status and has been recognized by district, local, and state leaders for that improvement. Dr. Barber is a graduate of Marquette University and earned his PhD in Educational Leadership and Organizational Development from the University of Louisville. He currently serves on the U of L's Board of Overseers and is a past board member of the Kentucky Museum of Art and Craft. He is also a former state champion coach and runner and held the Class A state record in the 1,600 meters for 18 years in Kentucky. Dr. Barber is a proven leader who has demonstrated a passion and commitment for supporting student achievement and for this wonderful community that is Louisville. It's said that you don't remember days, you remember moments. I was with Houston at the moment he told the Fern Creek faculty that he was moving to Shawnee. I was there when joy went to silence, but I was also there a few minutes later when they gave him a standing ovation. I was there when we said, somebody's got to call Joey Bailey and tell him this. Because that's important that Joey Bailey knows this before it's announced. But I was also at the Academy at Shawnee when he ran into two students who were at their locker and he said, "I'm your new principal." And I saw the smiles on their faces. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you Dr. Houston Barber.
Thank you, Dr. Hargens and Mr. Bailey. It's always an honor. Really appreciate this opportunity. I also want to introduce, I've got a special guest here today, Cecilia Amdahl. She's here from the Academy Shawnee, so I wanted to prove that I did do something at Fern Creek. So I'm trying. No, but she's here as representing Academy Shawnee. Let me start off. In 1986, it was an important year for me. I met a lady by the name of Wilma Rudolph. You know, I was standing in the Capitol building in Frankfurt, and I was talking with her and engaging in a conversation, and she was talking to me about her story. And I'll never forget it because she said directly to me, she said, "You know, when I was growing up, and she had polio, and I was trying to work through and navigate the system, I kept getting denied until she finally figured out someone who would be an advocate for her and worked through that system to help her get the appropriate services she needed. That story resonated with me even when I was at a younger age, and I felt like it not only resonated, it inspired me, because she later told me, she said, I ended up winning 3 Olympic gold medals. She had polio to become an Olympic champion. She persevered. That story was about challenges and overcoming challenges. From that day forward, I recognized not only did I have a passion for her commitment to overcoming difficulties, but it resonated with me about what I wanted to do. There are barriers we can control, and there are barriers that we can't control. And I think about the times that I've been faced with things that are very challenging and that things that are out of my control, but I also know that there are things that we have to remove that are barriers. I thrive on the mantra that when people say it can't be done, that it can be. There's that old quote, why? Some people say, why? Why not, is what I often say. I want to share with you these challenges that I've faced personally have led to a lot about the research that's been conducted and the leadership that I bring to the table. I'll share with you a personal story. When I just became principal at Fern Creek, my son was diagnosed with cancer, and he had a blood cancer. And we were told by the doctors he had a rare blood cancer, monosomy 7, and he was told, basically we were told there was going to be very little that we could do other than a bone marrow transplant. So we went through that process, and a 1 in 10 million shot, we found a donor. And he is today 100% donor, and he's thriving. He's in Chenoweth Elementary School, so he's loving it. But what I want to share with you about that is the trials and tribulations that we had to face made me realize how important it is to get kids not only the services they need, but to help them break through the barriers that they face with on a daily basis. So I'm proud to say that we went through this challenge, but it has made me a stronger leader and a better person. So I'm very excited to tell you that he is thriving. I want to share with you, why is that important? Because as I grew up, I had several mentors that helped to evaluate my leadership and help me grow as a leader. The story goes like this. Fern Creek was labeled a low-performing school. Everyone kept telling me, and the alumni knows this well, it can't be done. There's a lot of issues going on. I'm not sure that you're the right person to make this happen. There are issues taking place. But I slowly realized, what is this about? This is about getting kids an equitable opportunity to be successful and giving them a chance to have pride. And so I quickly realized that, when we got labeled, it was like this black cloud that hovered over the school. And I started to recognize that there's no research out there. There's little to no research on turnarounding high schools. There's a lot of research on turning around elementary schools and on some middle schools, and you may have read it, but there was very little research on turning around high schools. But I knew that there was a formula, and I felt from my experiences that formula was not perfect, but it had to be something where we got everyone engaged to focus on kids. And so there became this master plan. One of the things that we talked about initially at Fern Creek was, what was the problem? Was it the ownership of how we're advancing our kids? Was it the ownership the kids had for the school? Or was it simply something where we were not doing our jobs teaching in that classroom and not focused on the kids? So we recognized quickly that we had to create processes and structures that allowed for invention. So it's not like a box, in-the-box thinking. It wasn't that we had this formula that said, hey, this is the only way to do it. It was focused on create structures and processes that allow for invention. One of the things we also said is we have to look through the lens of our students. if we don't know what they're thinking and how they're acting, then it's hard for us to relate to them and to provide them with the services that they need. We had to listen. One of the things that we have to bring to the table is we listen and make an informed decision based on that. One of the things that I believe in strongly is progress, not motion. If you walk around and see people doing things, is it just motion? Is it activity? I wanted to see results. We wanted to see results. So at Fern Creek, it was about getting these quick wins and focusing on results. And I got to tell you, there was an intense focus on getting all members of the team to go in one direction. And as you know, in leadership, that can often be difficult and challenging to get everybody's agenda on the same page. But what did we do? Instead of focusing on adult distractions, we said, let's focus on student-centered actions. So we said, we're going to name and claim every kid. Every kid counts. We're not going to just teach to the middle. We're not going to teach the high end. We're going to find out what kids' needs are and figure out a way to move them. We did 30, 60, 90-day planning. So it was very targeted planning. We focused on 3 key areas. We focused on teachers coming together, looking at student work, looking at student results, and how to move those students. They actually, we created something called data days where they came together. And yes, it's called a return on investment. I guess the difficult challenge is when you pull teachers out of a classroom, what is the return on investment? So we were pulling teachers out during the middle of the day, and yes, initially it looks like, man, this is kind of hard. You're pulling teachers out. They're supposed to be instructing students. But the planning and the clear focus allowed for our teachers to do some greater returns on investment. We got down and dirty with what was going on with every individual student. So that was our professional learning communities. And we allowed them to be organic. So it wasn't like I handed a form and I said, here's the right form to turn back into me. It was invent based on kids, based on students. One of the other things that we focused on was culturally responsive teaching. We were very focused on this. We need to know what our kids are thinking, what they're doing, and how they're acting. But we also need to know what type of strategies to implement to help them so that they individually feel like they're being supported. The other thing we did was create college and career readiness focus. So we created a college room, and it was focused on how students could hit a pathway. Every individual student was going to have a pathway. You may have heard of the work that's going on in Jefferson County, and if you haven't, you should be starting to get engaged. The Ford Next Generation Learners is the next wave. If you're not on board, please get on board because the train is coming. It is an opportunity where kids get to do some project-based learning. They get to have student leadership opportunities, and it allows for a connection to the real world. This is some of the things that we started to implement at Fern Creek, and yet we also focused on that college and career readiness side. So I'm happy to tell you, when I first got there, we were at about 15-16% college and career ready, and as of last year, we moved it close, the needle up to 60% or close to. Now, there's a lot of work to be done, but I believe that we can get to 100%, or at least Fern Creek under the new direction, and they've got a great new principal there. And then the Academy of Shawnee, I'll share with you, is going to be moving that same needle. I want to tell you, it's also about creating school, ownership. So we had to create these schools of study that kids became proud of. So we created like a school of communication and media, a school of leadership and social sciences, and there was ownership within that. One of the other things is we developed strong partnerships for innovation. So I worked closely with groups like 21st Century Parks and Dan Jones and David Jones Sr. We also work closely with developing innovative ideas. So think of it this way. We got a chef, and we got an environmentalist, and we helped them to become teachers, and they created a course in English called food literacy. So we taught English 2 and English 3 through food and sustainability. And it actually, those kids end up outperforming our AP kids. You may know Joe Franzen and Brent Peters. These guys are innovators. And one of the things about it is we went out to the Navajo Nation, spent time out there studying poverty, studying food and poverty, and studying how it relates to literacy. And we brought that back to the classroom. And our kids, you should have seen their eyes. It changed their face of what true poverty is and how to move out of it. And I'll tell you this, when we invited parents to come in to actually see what was going on, we had more parents show up that day than any other function. They came and had a meal with our students. And actually, it was so passionate, they actually were writing journal entries with our kids. And so that type of innovation existed. We created digital literacy. You name it, we tried to make it real world and sustainable. The partnerships we developed were important too. I had this, I'll share with you, I've sat down with a lot of the people I was developing partnerships, and I'd show this big web design. I'm kind of a visual guy. And they'd say, how are you going to make that happen? I was like, well, you got to connect the dots. So it's kind of moving all these silos into a coordinated effort. And so we worked really hard. And I will say that Dr. Hargens, she invested in this process and helped to facilitate some great growth for Fern Creek. And I will say this also, Jim Allen, who's worked at the Ford NGL, he is working very hard to make movement in that area. One of the other things is we made partnerships with our alumni. They spent, and I'm going to give a big plug here, they spent over $1.2 million in the last 7 years. So I think Joey Bailey deserves a round of applause because they really helped us out big time. And so that was, and it was passionate, getting the right people in the right spots. You're only as good as your teachers and the people that are in those classrooms. I'm telling you right now, the solution is not to create new schools. The solution is to get the right teachers in the right spot. And let me tell you a little bit about that. I had to go, and this was really important for you to understand. I'm in the trenches here. I had to go to people's houses to recruit them and get them in our school. Now, I don't know the legalities all around this, but anyway, they, Dr. Hargens, forgive me. But one example is, they were in Shelby County anyway, so it doesn't matter. One of the examples is I went to a house, and I'm not going to say the name, but I walk in the door and I'm asking, I'm excited about telling you about, forming digital literacy. And he looks at me and he says, I need you to help me do something. And I'm like, I haven't met this guy. I'm walking in. We go over, we start bottling beer. I'm like, I'm a principal, right? He's like, yeah, just help me bottle this. So we're bottling beer. We start talking about stuff, and next thing I know, at the very last part of the conversation, we talked for 35 minutes. He's like, I think I want to come work for you, but I need to find out how we can make this happen. And it takes that kind of investment. I also, for Joe Franzen, I'll say this, I went to his house and he explained to me his whole sustainability plan for the city of Louisville, and I had to listen to him for quite some time. And he's very passionate if you haven't met him. And he cooked me breakfast, and I ended up getting him as well. But it takes that kind of entrepreneurship and leadership to get teachers in the right places, in the right spots. And that was those are several, but I spent a lot of time getting teachers, and I'm already on the pathway of doing that, looking around, and so I can always recruit. I'm always recruiting. The other thing is community support. When you invite parents to come to things, just telling them about it is not enough. You got to go to their door and engage them and actually make a personal invitation. Make a personal invitation, and that worked very well. We also created a student advisory council where they had real leadership opportunities and real leadership decisions. Now let me talk about sustainability quickly here. I was talking with Ishman Burks, and we were talking about his relationship with Coach K. And one of the things I'll share with you is he always talks about when Coach K came into the practices, he had his assistant coaches, they were working it, but he came in with the game plan. He came in with the game plan. That's kind of how I visualize my leadership. I've got to have people, I can't do it all myself. I've got to have people working it and running it and then empowering those people and empowering our teachers to empower our students. That's how success happens. And I believe it happens in any organization that way. You know, the thing about it is that we got to continue. So what's now? What is here and now? We got to continue to challenge those existing structures of how to play school. And we got to provide mechanisms of support for innovation, School of Innovation, and inventions. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no exact formula. There's some key evidence that suggests it's getting it. You got to get the right people in the right spots, but there's foundational principles of setting structures to invent. I also believe, you know, when I think about the Academy of Shawnee, the perception is worse than the reality, but it's going to need a boost of support and commitment rather than let's avoid the problem. And the issues are this. We've got to go in there and name and claim every kid, and they've been doing a great job of doing that. But we've got, one of the things that I'm very interested in doing is creating something that maybe hasn't been done before, I don't know. But it's called a 3-to-1 model. I want to have 3 adults for every child. 1 for social, emotional, 1 for academic, behavioral, and 1 for mentoring. So I'd love to engage you in that process. And it's going to be a very coordinated effort. Also, there has to be a positive culture infusion and a student-centered focus. We've got to ignite the community about all our schools and take all these silo efforts, because everybody's got these efforts that they're doing. And I'd like to invite you to become more coordinated in the approach and have a focus on these priorities. These students at Academy Shawnee, you would love them. They need direction, they need guidance, but you would love them. I'm already loving my time there. I miss the creek, of course, but I'm loving my time there, and it's a calling for me. And you know, all students are going to get in a pathway, and we're going to spend some time carefully coordinating and planning that. And we're going to bring AP to the school. We're going to get a band going. We're going to get this done. And it just takes that passion, that energy, energizing others. You got to execute. You know, it's those 4 E's wrapped in a P. It's we are Shawnee now. But let me tell you something. Fern Creek is on the rise as well, and all JCPS schools are moving. They're moving. And so what's next? We've got to be dedicated to our children, because if we're dedicated to the children of JCPS, the city moves. We've got to follow Dr. Hargan's lead. And I'm not saying that because she's already given me many opportunities, but she really is about kids. Doesn't matter who you talk to, she's about kids. We have to believe we can win. We have to believe that all of our children deserve an opportunity for a quality and equitable education. Because remember, hope is oxygen to the soul. And I'm telling you right now that the Academy Shawnee is going to play a big role in providing this hope. And it's going to become a model of success, just like Fern Creek. And I really believe, and I'm not naive enough to tell you this, but this traces of poverty and despair will begin to dissipate. And the children there are our future. And I'm telling you, when the public schools are thriving, the city's thriving. So take a stand, invest in our children, and invest in public schools of Jefferson County. And I thank you for today, and I thank you, Mr. Bailey. I thank you, Dr. Hargens and Rotary Club. And it's been an honor, and thank you so much.